I will leave it to the competitive team and to the affirmative team to choose if it's, are you pro that topic or against the topic?
What do we say? What the fuck are we doing?
Just say the affirmative team is
If they start top.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks, first of all, for giving us this opportunity to express our emotions and opinion about this topic. We are the team that agrees with keeping the social media transactions, be it likes, dislikes, comments, votes, and polls. We all know that internet connects us. More than 50% of the world is connected today, of which 42% of the world population is using social media. When it comes to UAE, more than 98% of UAE population is actually connected, of which 80% of UAE population is also using social media. It means that UAE population is tech savvy. So what is being done in this regard? Before actually talking about the impact of social media expressions, transactions on our mental health, it's very important to shed the light on the digital literacy and knowledge for the users of the social media. So similarly to our life, in real life, we do have certain principles by the positive citizenship. In the same way, in the digital world, we do have set of principles that guide our life in the online world. So if people are equipped with the right knowledge, skills, and tools, they will be able to use technology wisely and mindfully, and wisely. Recently, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid also issued a set of guidelines for the attitude in the social media, of which positive interaction was one of the main ones. If this means something that we should actually encourage each other to use social media in a very positive way. Finally, it's not about backwarding technology and forbidding people from using expressions online. It's about educating them and training them to use it in a very mindful and positive manner.
So in the digital world, we have multiple platforms that we can use for connection and expression. So removing one feature or any interaction or transaction, it will actually affect somehow the ecosystem because each feature complete each other or interrelated. Now, it all started in 2009 when Facebook invented the like button. Like button was actually invented to limit the comments because a lot of people would write repetitive comments. Now, let's say in a wedding post, someone posted a wedding photo, there would be like, congratulations, congratulations, and so on. So they were like, why don't we just create a button where people can just press and they just like it, basically. Now, virtual life is not different than the real life that we live in. So we should all just, because I'm aware that some people, okay, would actually have fake personas in real life, in virtual life, but the same applies in real life anyways, because a lot of people around us can be fake too. Now, what I'm trying to say is that we are all, we have different types of people, we have different content types, we have different preferences. So it's all about digital citizenship that Amal spoke about briefly. Now, when it comes to emotions, emotions are a fundamental part of our life. Now, if we talk about organizations, they actually use data analytics just to analyze the user preferences or behaviors, just to be able to give them the recommendation or push content to them based on their preferences. So if we removed such interactions, you won't be like some companies won't be able to tailor the needs of the target audience. Now, social media expressions proven to have ultimate advantages on the people. For example, many freelancers use social media to promote their services or businesses, products, or so on. So the trick is to educate people on how to use this tool rather than abuse it.
Thank you, Ranud. besides awareness and self-expression, a third point is about mental health. And ultimately, mental health really depends on the individual and how they interact with these things. I mean, we kind of come at it with an angle of sticks and stones may break our bones, but words will never hurt me. And there's a lot of tools on social media that can help us prevent us from seeing these kind of negative comments. So if we do kind of adopt a positive citizenship and a positive mindset while interacting with each other, the end result will be positive. But negativity can also be thwarted and diverted through blocking, through disliking certain negative comments that we found on it's being popularized on a lot of different websites. It's also important to note that each person is really in charge of their own mental health state with social media, and it's important to not let it use you as a tool, whereas you should ultimately use social media as a tool by limiting it through screen time. There's a lot of different ways of approaching this, detoxing. But thank you for your time, and this is our argument for using social media transactions. Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today. Today we're talking about the transactional nature of social media and the impact it has on mental health. And we are of the view that it has a negative impact on mental health. I'd like to also thank the team for starting off. Appreciate your comments. From our perspective, I would like to start with a quote on the subject matter of whether social media is addictive. And just bear with me. I feel, closer. Hello. So I feel, it's too loud, really? Okay. I feel tremendous guilt. The short-term, dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created is destroying our societies. Now, that is not something that I made up. This is actually what the ex-VP of Facebook's user growth had actually said to students when he was asked about the addictive nature of social media. So the people that created it are actually saying it's addictive. And they are expressing their guilt. And how does it become addictive? And what are they talking? So the first point is, it is a designed addiction. So it has been thought out, planned, and designed. Second of all, mental health. We're talking about its impact on anxiety, depression, and specifically also sleep deprivation. And of course, last but not least, we're also talking about the impact that it's having on the youth. So the key question is, how is it addictive? And this was what the VP had said, is that dopamine. So the dopamine-driven, so dopamine actually is what the feedback loop comes in for humans. So the tools that they have done actually increases the dopamine levels until it becomes very high, and as a result, when people do not get the likes that they're requesting, then they begin to fall into depression. And I would just like to hand over to my colleague to talk about that.
Okay, so let's talk about why this is a problem, okay? We have 2 billion or more Facebook users around the world. The average user spends 2 hours a day on social media. And according to TED, up to 10% of internet users are psychologically addicted, which means they're not able to control the amount of time they spend online. And the transactional tools that we're discussing here amplify what they call social competition, so something that exists within us naturally. But instead of being us versus our friends or us versus our community, it's literally us versus the world, and there's a lot more for us to take in. Now, I'm glad my colleague mentioned Facebook's invention of the like button. One of the inventors of the like button actually herself had an issue with addiction to this, and she said that she struggled with her sense of self-worth. Sean Parker, who was Facebook's founding president, also said that the company set out from the very beginning to make things addictive, to keep people on Facebook as long as possible. And dopamine, as my colleague here mentioned, is what allows drugs to be addictive. And big tech know this. So all of the big players in social media understand this. And there's even a company in California called Dopamine Labs, which specializes in working with these type of platforms to make their features more addictive. But what's the problem with addiction? It leads to a number of problems. One, depression and loneliness. It leads to sleeping disorders, cyberbullying, accidental deaths, societal issues, radicalization, and a number of societal problems. But we need to ask ourselves, who actually pays the price? And those that pay the price are the children. And I'll end it there for now.
Thank you.
Okay, affirmative team, you have 3 minutes to respond.
So the first thing I want to respond with is the addictive nature of social media that they've talked about. While yes, it can be addictive, there are many things in this world that can be addictive. Coffee, for example, is addictive. Sugar is addictive. There are normal pills that are used that can be addictive. What's important is self-control and monitoring that we have to impede on these kind of limitations. While it is easier to be addicted to social media, yes, because most of it is for free, it's easy to access, it's on our phones all the time. There are software developments that can limit, for example, screen time on your phone. And that all has to come from an internal source within, that you want to take control over your life and to not let these substances take control over you. Generally, and while 10% are psychologically addicted, for example, we don't want to disregard the fact that the rest of the 90% aren't. And this is still a minority group that we are talking about. And there will be this kind of case in almost every subject matter that we do talk about. In terms of limitation, again, and that's one thing I wanted to note with children. YouTube, for example, there's a specific category for YouTube that children can access, and they have certain screen time for it during the day. It can also be used as a positive reinforcement for homework well spent, just like TV as kids. You know, nobody would always be allowed to watch TV all the time. If you do well, you get the time to watch TV. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague who will talk about it a little bit more.
So I'm glad that you actually brought up the Facebook like button inventor. I'm gonna talk about one of the engineers. His name is Justin. He was part of the team who invented the like button. He noticed that he was really addicted to the tool, but he was actually self-aware. So what he did, he asked his personal assistant to monitor his screen limit time. So what was amazing about the whole experience, that he educated himself. He is self-aware, so he's limiting his screen time, and instead of just falling in the trap of the addiction.
I would like to add a point on the downsides of removing such kind of transactions, because today many organizations in the world rely on the user behavior, like the likes they do, the comments and everything. So if in case we remove such kind of transactions, what will be the impact on these organizations? What sort of improvement they can give to the people after analyzing their data, if there's no data actually to analyze? You know that technology advancements requires data analysis in order to provide better and best solutions for the community. Thank you.
Oh, we have a minute? Okay. Sorry, since we still have a minute, we're going to keep the ball rolling. We want to highlight a specific website that we think is an excellent use of these kind of examples, a website called Reddit, which uses a lot of these interactions of upvoting and downvoting and starring and sticking in comments for people to reach the best kind of information as quick as possible, and also downvoting negativity so that it's not seen for public use. For those who are unaware, it's a forum with many sub-forums in Reddit called subreddits. For example, Dubai culture or food. And let's say I try to look for the best food place in town, and I post it as a question. People who have the best recommendations will be upvoted, the comment will be upvoted through the community, which means I can access the best kind of information as fast as possible, and filtering through this kind of, and we all know how hard it is to filter through a lot of information online. At the same time, if I do post a negative comment, or if there's a negative comment available, it's up to us as a community to be positive about it, downvote it, so it's hidden from the public eye and limitations are set on that person.
All right, so I'm glad you brought up how other things are addictive, right? So you mentioned sugar. Sugar is a huge contributor to cancer, diabetes, obesity, and many other things. Sugar addiction is a major issue in the world. Anything can become addictive. So even exercise, which is a very important part of living a healthy lifestyle, can also be addictive and lead to premature death. So the argument here isn't about whether or not addiction is the problem. It's about the fact that these tools are engineered to be addictive, right? And the problem is that we don't have kids walking around all day with sugar in their pocket, right? But we do have kids walking around all day with access to social media sites. So it's a different accessibility, it's a different type of addiction. And I think that's the key concern here when it comes to children.
And I think from an adult perspective, while having self-control and being able to actually manage the amount of time that you spend on social media, children do not necessarily have this self-control. And so the Cyberbullying Research Center, which is based in the US, actually started collecting data on cyberbullying in 2002. And since 2002, cyberbullying has doubled with the increased use of social media. And as a result of cyberbullying, children are now more exposed to hatred on a 24/7 basis, where before, to be bullied, you actually had to be in the physical presence of a bully. But now, with the use of such social media entities as Facebook and Instagram, likes and comments, children can actually be bullied 24/7. And so if we look at the news previously, children have been pushed to kill themselves as a result of cyberbullying and hatred that they've faced in school. An example is Mallory Grossman, who's age 12 from New Jersey. Because of cyberbullying on Facebook, she killed herself as a result. Sadie Riggs, as well, 15 years old, she was bullied for the pure fact of having red hair and braces. And so her mom eventually took her phone and smashed it to try and decrease her exposure to cyberbullying. But a week later, they found her hanging in her room. So I think from an adult perspective, yes, we can control it. But how do you mitigate cyberbullying, which is really impacting our children and our youth and our teens? And how do you prevent these suicides?
Thank you. I'd like to also add that on the subject of addictivity, yes, TV is addictive, as was mentioned, and so is coffee, but so is heroin. Heroin is very addictive. So is alcohol and tobacco, and there are age limits to consume alcohol and to consume tobacco. A report by the Royal Society of Public Health actually said that social media and the tools that make it addictive are up to 4 times more addictive than alcohol and tobacco. And just to put things into perspective, alcohol and tobacco costs the US economy $740 billion in terms of treatment. And I don't think coffee costs that much in terms of treatment. Thank you.
We're not talking about alcohol and tobacco. Okay. Wait. So what's next?
Okay, to start with, I would like to talk about the cyberbullying and its impact on the mental health. There are no studies that prove that there is a direct relationship between cyberbullying and mental health in terms of leading to suicide. And that is based on a recent study that was done by the University of Pennsylvania. There is a correlation, but there is no direct relationship that make or force a person to, even if it's a kid, to commit suicide. And when you speak about the children using social media, why the children are using social media in the first place without supervision of their parents? If the right education and awareness is given to them, the right supervision and parental controls are set in place, it will not reach the limit or to a level where the kids may actually get depressed and, have a negative impact on his usage of the technology.
I'd like to add a point as well. Now, the beauty about tracking metrics that we have in social media, we are more aware about the cyberbullying that happens because bullying is everywhere in virtual world or even in real life. So what happens, you use such transactions or interactions on Twitter, Twitter is just an example of one of the social medias. You can just raise awareness that there you go, there's bullying happening here, or there are videos about it, and so on. So using social media for awareness is very important, and you can track it as well in terms of bullying.
Besides that, even if there's a lot of controls over content filtering that parents can set for children, if we're talking about children in this specific case, or for anyone. If there's certain words you don't want to see, hate words, things that could be racial slurs, or certain things that could be appalling to the eye that you could see or read, it's completely up to the control of us and people who can set these controls to not see them. That's number one. Number two, while we were talking about things that are addictive, yes, alcohol and tobacco are addictive, but again, there is an age limit on that. I agree, I understand that. But again, with social media not having that age limit, we are setting them in place for children specifically. And for us, it's important to be educated, number one. And that's why digital intelligence and digital citizenship is really important, because I'm sure the fair share of people who are sitting here as well as had some case in which social media has affected their life in a negative manner. But these things are made so that we can overcome and use it as the tool that it was intended for us to be used, as something to raise awareness, to educate ourselves, to share things in a positive manner so that we could understand and better society. There's many things that I know I would have missed, for example, this panel if I didn't use social media, for example. And this is just a great example of the tool. How much time do we have left? 15 seconds? In conclusion, because we have to give our conclusion marks, right? Later? Okay, so that's it. Okay, thank you.
Can I add one point though? Omar, by the way, since we are talking about social media transactions, I follow you on Twitter and I noticed that you use one of the transactions, which is the poll. So if we are arguing about removing it, then how come you used it?
Correct.
Don't get too personal,
All right, do we start? All right, first of all, I'd just like to say to the point that cyberbully is everywhere. And, you know, my colleague Ubaid had mentioned that. So is fake news. So are guns. If you go to the US, you can get guns and you can shoot people. That is available everywhere. The fact that something is available does not mean that it has positive effect on mental health. The fact of the matter is it has a proven negative impact on mental health. And yes, I do use some of the same things social media provides, but I do not use it consistently also, and that's in my own defense. One last thing is the US, there is a senator that's starting a bill to show even how governments perceive this. It's called SMART, which is Social Media Addiction Reduction Technology, which is trying to limit, not social media, but trying to limit the features that are addictive within social media. Thank you.
So while I understand that there is currently no direct correlation between cyberbullying and suicide, there is a direct correlation between bullying and suicide. So from 2008 through now, suicide rates and admissions into suicide-related deaths in hospitals have doubled in the US in children and in teens. Psychologist Jean Twenge describes the I generation, which is our generation, the internet generation, on being on the brink of the worst mental health crisis in decades, and links this to the use of social media. What's really interesting is that social media gives people the ability to be anonymous or semi-anonymous. So when you're on social media, you're actually more likely to act in a way that you would not if this individual was in front of you. So that sense of anonymity emboldens you and actually allows you to do things that are more violent. Oh, and one last point. The Megan Meyer Foundation actually found that 90% of suicides are related to mental illness. So there's an indirect correlation between cyberbullying, the mental illness that results from it, which is anxiety, depression, isolation, sleep deprivity, and then suicide.
Thank you. First of all, you made some good points about digital citizenship. Do you have any solutions that you can recommend? in terms of regulation, in terms of legislation, in terms of policy, anything about directing the behavior or allowing a sufficient amount of social media use? Do you have any guidelines?
Actually, in UAE, we started recently the concept of digital well-being since March 2019, which is this year, in line with the National Strategy for Well-being 2031 that was announced by Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid recently. This initiative will have a lot of, we can say, sub-initiatives to do with awareness and education, such as camps at schools, online and classroom workshops for the parents, because the role of the parents is very important to educate and transfer the knowledge to children as well. Apart from the digital well-being and the applying the knowledge of the concept of digital well-being, which has actually 8 pillars, among them there is cyberbullying. We are talking here about digital ethics. We are talking here also about digital footprint and how people in the community can keep the right or maintain the right settings in order to maintain their digital footprint, which impacts them in the long run. And one more thing I would like to add, there is also an international practice to adopt the digital intelligence that my colleague Ubaid already spoke about, which is nothing but an international framework by DQ Institute. It has a lot of pillars which are almost similar to what we have in the digital well-being, and around more than 100 countries in the world has already adopted it. Like in Singapore, the students go through the training specific to digital intelligence. Whenever there is a weakness for specific students, they get trained in order to uplift them to a level where they have a proper digital intelligence. Thank you.
Thank you. And just one more question for the opposing team. We mentioned other addictions such as coffee or drugs or, you know, anything else. But to play devil's advocate, if you look at, for example, Portugal legalized drugs, I think about a decade ago now, just over a decade ago now. And the results have been quite astonishing, to be perfectly honest with you. So just again, to play devil's advocate on this, by completely going, can you achieve the right behavior by forcing it? Or do you believe that you have to go cold turkey on it? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Well, all right. I think, mic drop. It's always my turn, the mic drop. So first question, or first, in reference to your question, the key point is all drugs, legal drugs, are regulated. So we're not here to talk about the legality or whether it should be legalized or not. But those that are legal are regulated. So in most countries. Number two, in reference to going cold turkey or not, I think this is something that each of us will have our views on. But one of the things that research has shown is that many of the advocates of limiting the effects of the function or the transactional nature of the social media tools, which is the likes and unlikes and the follows and the story and everything else, a lot of them were actually requesting regulation that the social media, to put the onus on the social media platform to actually put up pop-ups and say, listen, you're using this way beyond, it has to be shut down. So I think a lot of it was putting regulation on the social media platforms themselves.
And I think if you look at it historically, epidemics or drugs or tobacco or even cocaine and Coca-Cola were legal at some point. So it takes society several years before the actual impact that drugs or, tobacco or social media has for society to make the necessary changes, or countries and governments to make the necessary changes to protect their people. I think we're in the middle of the cusp of this, where the actual impact that this is having will not be felt, is being felt right now, but the full impact will not be felt for a few more years.
Sorry, just one more thing before we end on that note. There are, from a healthcare perspective, there are facilities that try to treat this addiction. And what we've seen is that in the initial stages, the withdrawal becomes...
Sorry, do you mean social media addiction?
Yes, social media addiction. The withdrawal actually becomes, I spoke to a psychologist and they said the withdrawal symptoms of not having their phone, not being able to communicate and not receiving the validation and the likes and everything else at times becomes overwhelming as much as any other drug.
But do you think that's because, sorry, do you think that's because of social media or because they're not able to communicate with their families? I mean, there are other things that they can communicate.
Social media. Social media.
Okay. Question from me. So we agree that there are a set of certain solutions that have to be in place in order for us to fight this, what you call an epidemic of social media, right? But evidently self-control is one of them. And it has to be a key ingredient, just like fighting any other kind of addiction in any form, whether it's sugar, in food, any of that, even drugs. But I'm hearing a lot more solutions from the other team, and I'm hearing really good points from you guys with really good proof, but I'm not hearing a lot of solutions. So you're saying that at some point, you mentioned that we need to stop it, or we need to regulate it, or maybe even curb it at some point. But that's me making an assumption on your comment. So what would be a clear-cut solution that you would propose? It doesn't have to be scientifically based, but something that you think should happen in order to limit it.
Thank you for the question. So, the point of this debate is not about what should be done. The point of this debate is about what impact this has on society. And what we've argued is that it has a negative impact on society. And I think we've proven that. But to answer your question anyway, what we suggested is, number one, it's something new. It's something that has become an epidemic. It's negatively impacting children. It's causing addictions. People are going into rehabilitation because of it. It's being manipulated by the big companies that use them. With all of that in mind, I think we need to study it more. We need to understand its implications. We need to start regulating its use. And then we need to create cooperation between government, mental health professionals, and these big tech companies that use these tools and technologies to really create safe frameworks around them.
I think what we've also been seeing is sort of the rise of radicalization through the use of social media. So if you look at like far-right groups in the US and in Europe and otherwhere in the world, they use social media as sort of their entity to recruit and really target, for example, individuals who are like mentally susceptible to this. In my perspective, we actually need to keep Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat legally liable for events that happen, of acts of terrorism that happen as a result of their platforms. Currently, there is no regulation mechanism in Facebook or that has been implemented completely that takes out, for example, propaganda that white extremists use in the US. So if you look at the El Paso shooting that happened earlier this year, the guy was targeting Hispanics in America. And then the shooter in Christchurch in New Zealand, who killed 51 people at the mosque, used the memorandum that the other guy had published and mimicked it in a different location. So my issue is not really in the transactional nature. The problem is the impact that it has on society. So these companies, similar to the way we've been regulating sugar and high fructose corn syrup and even monopolies in the US when it's on the railroads or transportation, need to be regulated and need to be made responsible for facilitating these types of actions and the results that they're having on the world.
So basically these are your solutions, to basically suggest regulations for them.
Yes.
Which is a fair point. And to your earlier point, Twitter actually recently said that they're going to ban political campaigns.
Exactly.
Because
From the propagation
exactly.
of fake news.
Exactly. Now, just back to the affirmative team. How does that impact your earlier point about using options or push notifications such as likes or comments? And how do you think regulations or initiatives like the one Twitter did could affect the amount of data, the amount of content contextualization that these companies, whether the advertisements or whether the Google algorithm does for the average user? How does that impact it?
I just have to say that I think while some things should be regulated, yes, our argument is not about the regulation of, but the cost or benefit of these transactional services. Are they a pro or a con? And ultimately, our argument is that it is a pro. If we're going to talk about this kind of stuff in a specific context, for example, certain political issues that have been happening, people have been resorting to social media and popularization of certain posts so that people can become aware when news outlets are unreliable, because people are speaking for themselves, especially if they're, for example, upheld by a specific regime. I mean, I don't want to be pointing fingers and be very political about this, but Lebanon is a fantastic example of this stuff right now. If the government tries to shut down a certain thing, the people are telling each other where to go and how to do and how to progress from a certain standpoint. That aside, we still think ultimately that there are a lot more pros than cons to this. In terms of certain algorithms that are being used, once algorithms are set in place the way they're meant to, and our interactions should be with them the way that where they're supposed to, and ultimately this all stems from proper education, self-control, and understanding of what we're using and how we're using it, things will ultimately, or things will lead into better progress. I mean, I'm sure many of you guys have been recommended things all the times that you wouldn't have thought about through social media, that even though sometimes it can be a bit annoying, ultimately it's made for you as an end user, right? Because we are the end users of these programs. Something would pop up on my feed and I'd be like, okay, actually this is excellent. This is what I need. I didn't think of this before. But it's because of these interactions and these tiny interactions I have with social media on a commercial basis or even on a personal one. If I'm interacting with certain friends about a certain topic, more of that topic pops up and I get educated about that specific topic even more. If this framework wasn't in place, it wouldn't be as beneficial. Again, we want to state that it is extremely important to educate the base so that these things can be used properly, but they can be used properly is the main thing. And because they can be used in a positive way, there is a positive outcome ultimately.
I would like to add a point on the laws and regulation aspect, which is the laws that are regulated within specific countries. Like, for example, in UAE, as per Ministry of Interior, they do have specific laws. It might not be an answer to the point that you just asked, it's just an addition. So rules and regulations set by Child Center and Ministry of Interior, the same rules that apply in the real life. The point here is that the same rules that apply in real life, they apply online too. Now, if we speak about bullying, and there is a punishment for bullying if it's extreme level in the real life, cyberbullying also have some sort of punishment when it comes, if it's extreme level. And there are like a call center where people can even report such kind of cases if there is an impact on the children. So there are laws and regulations already existing to manage and control, similarly to whatever laws and regulations are in the real life.
We don't have any further questions, so we will deliberate, as they say, and get back to you in a few.
Competitive team, you can give your conclusion once the music just dies. Okay.
From our side, on conclusion, you know, the other team had mentioned about the positive impacts of social media, and we don't doubt that. Social media has a lot of positive impacts, including access to support groups, access to information, positive information. So there are positive uses for social media. And I'm sure if you ask somebody in North America in the National Rifle Association, they'll say that so does machine gun style assault rifles. So there definitely is positives. Today's debate, I'm afraid, is not necessarily about social media per se. It is about the transactional nature of the tools of social media, the likes, the dislikes, the stories, the everything else. So whereas it's good to hear about the positive side, it's important to focus on the transactional nature of the tools in social media. And I'll pass over to talk to my colleagues to talk about the impact, the negative impact also of social media.
Okay, so if we go back to why the like button was created in the first place, right? It was a very simple way to give feedback to somebody who posted content, right? So its benefits were that the person posting the content could know whether or not their audience appreciated it. And it also gave the audience the ability to see that other people were interacting with that piece of content. So what we're discussing today is whether or not that in itself has a negative impact on society and humanity in general. And we've argued that it does. Now our colleagues over at the other table have said that the same rules that apply in real life apply to the digital world, where it's not the case. In real life, you can't be anonymous. Online, you can be, right? So you're not as accountable for your actions in the digital world as you are in real life.
Our last point, while I do agree with the attempt of regulation and then the assumption that humans in their nature are good individuals, if we look at extremist groups who use social media to propagate their hate, in the US alone, far-right extremist groups, 56% of them use Facebook as a tool to radicalize individuals and recruit them to neo-Nazi groups. And 90% of loner terrorists, so those individuals who've shot up mosques and concerts over the past 3 years, have been radicalized on social media. So what do you do when the individuals behind the screen are not actually well-mannered or good-natured? How do you regulate the hatred that they're spewing through comments and likes and the sharing of content that is influencing others to do the same in a global context?
Just to quickly point out and to conclude what they were saying, at the end of the day, there's a lot of ways that we can monitor social media, right? It's through this monitoring that we can create and take the correct actions that we must as a society to make sure that negativity does not stem out of it. So, because a lot of these social media platforms are monitored, it is, of course, up to and the responsibility of law enforcement or lawful authorities to take these this kind of data into account, to take the appropriate action so that these kind of preventative measures can happen. And there's many cases, some of which I do not have any statistics to prove right now, but I'm sure there are multiple cases in which social media was used to prevent a lot of these situations from happening more than once, I'm sure. And my colleagues will also take it from there.
I just have one point. Emotions are a fundamental part of our lives. It's all about learning how to control them.
And I'll conclude with this. Internet is an extension of our society. So, so whatever values we have in our life should be implemented in the internet as well. So we need to educate ourselves when it comes to emotional to digital intelligence as much as we try our best to educate ourselves when it comes to emotional intelligence. When we use these tools wisely, social media can offer endless opportunities when it comes to getting your whatever content you would prefer to receive or see. Or you, as Ubaid mentioned as well, you can always learn from such content. Now, just one last question, like, are you using technology or is it using you? So I'm just gonna end it with that.
And I'm just gonna add one more point just before we finally conclude Renude's section, is that because that we have these transactional tools to evaluate the kind of content we see on social media, it's very easy to know what is good and what is bad. Otherwise, the comments that just are. And as a society, we can also promote and downgrade negative comments and negative interactions with one another on the negative aspect. And on the positive aspect, we can always spread awareness and show things, and we can spread awareness and shed light on information and topics that normally wouldn't get that much attention because of these like buttons. Through discovery channels or through, again, using Reddit as a fantastic example, there's a lot of topics that come up because the community deem it worthy for us to understand and know because they upvoted. It's up to us to share this kind of information with each other. It's important to take responsibility through our own interaction with social media, and at the end of the day, it always stems from educating. Again, it's always with education from the base, and thank you so much for listening to us. That is our conclusion. Thank you.
Okay. So, it took us some time, and there was a lot of argument between the two of us and the three of us when Yusuf was still here. We are going to announce the winner and explain why to justify this. The winner is this team. And the reason why, and this is what we were arguing about, was I felt, and I wanted to put this out there, that a lot of the things that were coming from this team played on emotions more than necessarily fact. However, at the end, there was a very solid conclusion, which really won us over, whereas I felt like this conclusion was less solid right at the end. However, throughout, it might have been better. If that makes sense. So I'm probably the wrong person to have voted because I basically just said everyone was a winner. But since we have to pick a winner, it is this team.